Good morning, Doug. Today we want to talk about Western civilization. You have a list, you tell me, of 12 things that make the Western civilization better and different than anything that's existed before or in parallel. Well, what are these 12 things?
Yeah, this is kind of a hot potato subject because, all these BLM and Antifa and all the rest of these people that are out there are jumping up and down like chimpanzees saying, Western civilization's horrible, it's racist, hi, hi, ho, ho, Western civ has got to go,
Yeah.
And you started seeing this back during the 60s, and it blew over and was replaced by the yuppies. The hippies were replaced by the yuppies, basically, at least in the current spirit of things. But now, people that hate Western civilization have come back and redoubled their efforts. So I thought about this, and I don't know if this list is unique. I didn't copy it from anywhere. I just thought about, well, what makes Western civilization different from and better than anything else? And in an era of multiculturalism, we're supposed to say everything's equal. And, we've got to look at the value of these civilizations. And, Columbus was a looter and a raper and an enslaver and a horrible human being. In fact, all of the people that came from Europe and basically disseminated their ideas and their technologies to the rest of the world, they're all made out to be basically criminals. So what is it that makes Western civilization what it is? And here's the things that I think they are. And each one of these things, I believe, are unique to Western civilization. In other words, there are people in Hindu civilizations or Chinese civilization or African or South American. I'm not even sure they have civilizations, quite frankly. They have cultures, but civilization in these really backward places is basically banging on the earth with a stick and maybe putting a couple of rocks together. But anyway, let's explore this and see how many social justice warriors absolutely go berserk after we talk about this. So first of all is free speech. And in America, we basically accept that did accept that as the normal thing. But it's being replaced by cancel culture. And you can't say anything now because it might offend somebody. And God forbid that it's designated as hate speech. Then you just better dummy up and keep your thoughts to yourself. So people that don't, I believe in totally free speech, incidentally. And when I mean totally, I mean absolutely totally, including hate speech. Now, how can I defend hate speech, which is perhaps the most extreme type of free speech? It's that it lets you know, I like to know who it is I'm dealing with.
Right.
I like to know what's on this person's mind. And if he doesn't say anything, I don't really know who I'm dealing with. But if he comes out and spews all kinds of things which are, unsavory or hateful, well, that's wonderful. Now I know who I'm dealing with and I can adjust my actions accordingly. So trying to quell hate speech is really stupid. And at best, it's putting a lid on a pressure cooker. So, and free speech is unique to Western civilization. We're the only ones that have made it part of our culture. I mean, think of another civilization or culture anywhere that actually made that a foundation stone. I don't know of any. Not that people haven't said what's on their mind throughout history.
Of course they have, yeah.
But it's never been a foundation stone of the actual civilization. So
right. And that root, wherever you start that root, then you're making compromises, compared to it. So like maybe in some cultures, like saving face might be more important than free speech, for instance, maintaining like the family status or the public representation of the family might be more important than free speech, for instance. So yeah, I think you're right. The anchor of it is where it matters. And that is first. What's your second one? What's the second?
Well, it relates very closely to free speech, and that's free thought. Because the thought gives rise to the word, and the word gives rise to the action. So it's a logical question. You've got to have free thought in order to have free speech, actually, and free speech in order to have free actions. So free thought is next, but today, George Orwell's thought crime is actually delegitimizing the idea of free speech. And there's actually a concept in psychiatry. And my feeling is that most psychiatrists are crazy, quite frankly, or borderline. So they came up with the thought of mental hygiene. There are things that you shouldn't think about. Well, why shouldn't you think about anything and everything that you can think about?
Yeah.
So this is crazy that somebody has decided, oh, mental hygiene says you shouldn't think about those things. Well, why not? You should think about them and either accept them or discard them. It's crazy. This whole idea of thought crime, and another modern concept which has come in is the idea of brainwashing, and it can be very overt and nasty, or it can be very subtle, where the people that are in control of the media say the same thing again and again and again,
Right.
until it kind of fills your head. So free thought is purely Western.
Well,
In fact, the idea of thought is.
when you talk about that changing, one of the things I know we've talked about before is I think you refer to it as the bastardization, or the changing of the language, so that even the words, I guess this relates to the brainwashing idea, that by eliminating certain words from the vocabulary or changing the meaning of certain words, why, just like we're talking about how red, now represents somehow the Republicans and blue represents the Democrats, even just like the inversion of ideas and words seems to interfere with people's ability to be able to think clearly and have free thought.
And nobody even questions these things anymore. They just kind of accept it, like a dog accepts whatever you put in his dish when it's around dinner time. So, okay, you can forget about free thought too. And you mentioned words. It's that in Orwell's 1984, the state explicitly tried to reduce the number of words used every year to get it down to just the most basic necessary things for survival. And that's pretty much what's happening today. There have been all kinds of words that have been extirpated from the language, which you're not supposed to use. Like starting about 40 or 50 years ago, it became unfashionable to use the word Orient or Oriental, okay? Well, it's the counterpart of Occidental, and these are just, Latin words for saying East and West, but you're not supposed to say Oriental because that might bring up an image, might bring up a politically impure thought of the wily Oriental or the tricky Oriental so purge the word. And there are many, many words like that. We could actually do a session on words which are going down the memory hole because they're politically incorrect.
That's another Orwell's term from 1984, right?
It is the memory hole. Exactly. And it's funny, these people that control things today are using 1984 not as a warning, but as an instruction book.
Exactly.
Everything in the world is turning bizarre and upside down. So anyway, forget about free speech, forget about free thought. And of course, related to free thought is the idea of rationality. If you're going to think, you've got to have certain concepts of logic and rationality. And I think this is going out the window too. It's funny, the leftists, and I guess started with the global warming hysteria. The idea is that, they believe that they're scientific, but they're actually not scientific. They're scientistic, which is to say, if you're a scientist, you look at things with logic and rationality and evidence, but a scientistic view is someone that uses the trappings of science in a rhetorical way. Mm. So you hear this all the time now. Well, the science says.
Science says, yeah.
Yeah, well, actually, we don't know what the science says because it's evolving constantly.
Right. And isn't the scientific approach fundamentally about disproving? You're looking for contrary evidence everywhere you turn to your hypothesis. Isn't that the basis of science?
That is the basis of it, right? You always have to question things, even if they're very politically incorrect to question. But scientists in today's PC world aren't supposed to question certain things because, well, look, I wasn't there in Germany in the 40s. I don't know exactly what happened with the Holocaust. There was something like were there 6 million people killed? What was it? I don't know. Nobody, like the number 6 million. Is it a correct number? Or was it only 5 million or 4 million? Or maybe only 1 million? I don't know. But there are certain things that you're not supposed to question. And in Europe, of course, if you even question, I mean, you will get a jail term, just as if you say certain things in Canada or England, something that's anti-religious group or anti-religious. You can't think rationally if you can't think about everything and accept it or reject it. And if you accept it, explain your reasons why rationally, and then have a discussion. But this is all going out the window, where there are some things that are just untouchable. And I guess I just mentioned the most untouchable of untouchable things that you're not supposed to. But there are dozens of things you're no longer supposed to question rationally.
Well, you're not supposed to question. I mean, now it could be about. It seems like there's so many third rails associated with this stuff that you have to just believe out of hand, like that masks work, or that this is that money printing is fine, or I mean, whatever. But I mean, all these things. I think this the science says argument. I always like to replace it with Yahweh, and if it works, if the sentence still works, if you say Yahweh or Jehovah in their claim, then it's it's bullshit. If they're come to some higher authority, if they're ever using that in order to prove something, it's wrong.
That's right. In other words, rationality is being replaced. Logical thought is being replaced with feeling, and feelings are now important because you can't hurt anybody else's feelings with your line of reasoning. And it's a question of replacing, facts with belief. So this is all part of the destruction of rationality, which is once again just about unique to Western civilization as a foundation stone. Not that people in China and Japan and India didn't think rationally. Of course they did. But it wasn't like a foundation stone of the society. It was just something that certain individuals did. So the fourth thing I've got is privacy. And it used to be you could talk about secrecy. There used to be a concept as Swiss bank secrecy. Nobody says that anymore. That's a no-no to say that you want bank secrecy. It must mean you have something to hide. So even saying that you believe in privacy is a no-no. It's been replaced with transparency, where everybody can see everything that you're doing. Hey, I'm an open book. I've got nothing to hide. Well, what you ought to do is take the doors off your bathroom, and it's crazy. The primitive societies, the jungle village, there was no privacy. I mean, you had some straw or a cloth over your front door, and anybody could look in through your window and see what you were doing and what you had. So privacy goes along with civilization. But these people seem to want to go back to jungle villages, and they call it transparency, which sounds so nice. I mean, you owe if if you run a corporation and you have people that, you're running their money or something like that, sure, you've got to be transparent with them. You owe that to them, but you don't owe it to the world at large at all.
Right.
And Western civilization is the only civilization that's made privacy, part of its actual culture. So, and that relates to private property. In primitive societies, the king or the ruler or whoever he is, he actually owns everything. And you can use it because it's convenient, but private property is not sacred. You really don't own anything. And they're trying to go back to that again today, where everything's owned, like if not by the king, by the collective or by the people.
Right.
And it's a little bit like, wind up with something like the Soviet Union, where theoretically nobody owned anything, or, well, you could own your toothbrush and you could own your clothes, and maybe you could own a car, but nothing that was a means of production that would allow you to grow in wealth and have more private property.
Right.
You could only own consumer goods. So you couldn't get anywhere if all you could own were consumer goods. So this is a uniquely Western concept too. You look at India and Africa, South America, none of these people owned anything. It was all the collective that owned things. They want to go back to that. I mean, it's insane. Okay, that's number 5. Number 6 on my list is the concept of liberty, where you can do what you want. That's what liberty's about. They don't like the idea of liberty because you might do something that conflicts with the collective. It's too dangerous to have liberty. You got to keep people under control. You got to keep them watched. They can't be free to choose or free to do anything. There got to be rules, as opposed to, liberty, which allows you to put a pack on your back and go walking down the road to wherever you want. Can't have that in a controlled society. I mean, they want to treat us, they want to abolish the concept of liberty, and we'd all be like medieval serfs at best, or even worse, like slaves.
Is the idea, you were talking about this and you talk about the idea of the collective, versus the individual, but the collective isn't really a thing. The collective is a thing that's used in order to disempower individuals. Because I was thinking again of the scientism type of approach where I could replace science says with Yahweh says, and it seems like you have these periods where maybe all of the property within a kingdom is owned by the king, which is basically anointed by God. It's not much different than having it so that all the property is owned by the collective, really, because and there's some like natural right to the collective, or where the collective has more power somehow, justified power than an individual would. And then but there's individuals that are just using that notion, I guess, in order to take. So it's not like there's nothing that's really shared among all the people. There never is or never could be. It's just that people use that notion that maybe we're as humans pretty weak to fall for, this idea of good for everybody.
There's always somebody that speaks for the collective. How do you know what 1,000 people want? Well, there's a guy that's going to make up his mind and he knows what they want. And so that's what we're going back to today. And especially as the economy collapses, and I'm convinced it's going to collapse catastrophically in the years to come, people are going to want a strong leader acting like chimpanzees to tell them what to do, just like in the 30s. They wanted strong leadership. So we got Mussolini and Stalin and Hitler and Roosevelt and Perón and so many other people like that, because everybody wanted strong leadership so that we could all pull together. Anyway, forget about liberty. That's going out the window. And along with liberty, very related to it, of course, is the idea of limited government. Instead of the all-powerful state, where the ruler is supreme, whether the ruler is a a king or a dictator or a president or the people or the proletariat where somebody speaks for them. It's the idea of unlimited government where the state can do anything.
Mm.
And we're going back to that again, I think. So,
Mm.
but it's a uniquely Western concept. I mean, never before in history, anywhere, has an individual had rights and the government was limited. That concept seems to be going away.
Certainly does. By popular demand, it's going away.
By popular demand, yes, that's right. More bizarro world stuff. And related to limited government is the concept of individualism. And even in some places like New Zealand, where I lived for years, they have the what's known as the tall poppy syndrome, where if you stand out from all your mates, you might get lopped off because you're just too big for your britches. So you shouldn't be too much of a standout, too much of an individual. And this is what identity politics is all about, where you're not an individual anymore. You are a Black, or you are a Jew, or you are or I don't know, 100 other things. That your identity is the group you're part of. That's what identity politics is all about. And that leads to things like nationalism, where you don't identify as an individual, you identify as primarily as being an American or a German or a Russian or a Chinese or whatever. This is insane, but this is the way it's always been. You identify as an Aztec or I identify as an individual. And if I'm a member of a group, well, okay, that's a come or go type of thing. But individuals out the window, it's dangerous.
Actually, I was started reading a book over the weekend called "Has China Won?" and it's written by a guy who's pretty sympathetic to China and Chinese national ambitions. Okay, and in it, one of the things he says is he talks about American culture in particular as compared to China culture, and how American culture tends to produce what he referred to as great men who stand out dramatically above the crowd. This tall poppy thing you were talking about before. And he points to a lot of the not business leaders really within America, from Steve Jobs to Elon Musk to, and Henry Ford or whoever. And he goes, and he talks about, then he goes back to China and goes, China had Mao, and Mao was a great man among the Chinese. Okay, this is his view, and he's definitely sympathetic to the Chinese view. So he considered Mao a great man, but his admission was that their culture, it's so rare for them to produce a great man, unlike the United States, which he said was an innate advantage the U.S. had over the Chinese, is the lack of likelihood to produce these, quote, great men. And I think this relates to the individualism thing you're talking about.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's funny, as Mao said, let 100 flowers bloom. And after they bloomed and identified themselves, that made it easy for them to chop
round up.
Right. Yeah. No, individualism is central to Western civilization, and it's going down the toilet with groupthink, and even with the way kids are brought up now, where a soccer mom, for instance. I guess they call them soccer moms because they ferry their kids to soccer games where they become parts of the team.
Yes.
Well, whatever happened to kids playing stickball in the street and just organizing themselves? And that's so different than, well, you got to go to football practice or baseball practice or soccer practice or whatever it is. This is kind of anti-individualistic, but it's being insinuated. You got to practice as part of a group for these things.
Mm-hmm.
So and that didn't used to be the case even.
Wasn't with my generation.
No, and absolutely not with mine. I mean, yeah, there was a little league, you could, if you're a real baseball fanatic, you could join the Little League.
Right.
Other than that, if you wanted to play ball, you went to a lot and played ball. You didn't have your mom
Right.
drive you to some place where you could put on a uniform to play ball.
So something about fear, though, it's been instilled with people where they feel like it's dangerous to leave your kids, to let your kids kind of go off on their own. I mean, that's what's really, it's not more dangerous, but that's what, as someone who has kids, I felt the pressure of my peers really, that, you just let your kid go to the park on their own, when they're 8 or 9 years old. I'm like,
They
oh,
might,
just go to the park.
they
I was
might,
3.
they might they might call child services on you.
They can. Yes. Child neglect. Yep.
That's just amazing. So forget about individualism, which is foundational. Number 9 is entrepreneurialism. Now, this is natural in a certain type of person, the best kind of people, where you look at the market of 8 billion other individuals, and as an entrepreneur, you ask yourself, what good or service can I provide to some or all of those 8 billion people to increase the amount of private property that I have? But entrepreneurialism is now looked upon, I guess everything's racist today, but it's exploitative. You're making a profit. And if you're making a profit, it means you're taking money away from other people. The whole thing is topsy-turvy. And so they're trying to put down, in other words, you're not supposed to be an entrepreneur. You're supposed to have a job, and that's your job. Can't be taken away from you because it's your job. You're not an entrepreneur anymore. You're an employee with your job. And with that, you get 2 weeks off and you work 8 hours a day, not a minute more, unless it's overtime. And you get a pension that somebody's going to magically provide for you. So the idea of entrepreneurialism is being flushed down the toilet.
Do you think that's uniquely Western, though, entrepreneurialism? I mean, because obviously you had great trading cultures, at least, that existed, well in advance of Western.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, the Chinese have always been very, all Chinese and Indian cultures, very much so. Yes.
I hate to call them the Orient, but
yeah, right. I mean, yes, they've had entrepreneurialism, no question about that. But I'm just thinking that I think that it was something that was natural and happened, and the ruler wouldn't put that down. But in the West, it's actively promoted as a virtue. That
it was celebrated, right? Exactly. Even failing as an entrepreneur was good. It was okay. Yeah. It was okay. Certainly, it wasn't. It did not keep you from succeeding in the future.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not like there weren't lots of entrepreneurs around the world. It's a natural human thing. But I'm not sure that even though there are, these great trading cultures in the East, it wasn't promoted as an actual value so much the way it is in our culture. So I think it's fair to say entrepreneurialism.
Okay.
And entrepreneurialism is being washed away with the idea of a job and a pension and fixed hours and labor regulations and all the rest of that type of thing.
Yeah, well, and even the understanding of entrepreneurialism from my perspective, in that it fundamentally, as an entrepreneur, I see it as you're creating value. So you're actually making a pie bigger. And for some reason, the way I think people are growing and understanding it is a lot more like a finance situation instead, where you're just dividing up the pie. The pie is only a certain size. And the question is, how do we divide it up so everyone gets their fair share? And that's antithetical to what an entrepreneur thinks about the way the world works. They believe they can create more value.
Yeah, exactly. And that word fair is a very tricky word in addition. It's
the only F word I hate.
Yeah, because it's so arbitrary. What is fair? Anyway, these people think that it's something that's written in stone. Okay, number 10 is, let me see if I can read my own writing. The concept of industrialism. And industrialism, developed in the West, is basically having machines do your work for you and putting together companies that that, burned coal and sun wheels spinning and so forth. And the high standard of living today that we have is due to industrialism. It's not due to make work projects. Anyway, it's being washed away by greenism. I mean, one thing I like about Elon Musk is he said, if you want to have stuff, you have to make stuff. And these people out there today seem to think that stuff magically appears, but you need industry to make stuff, unless you're going to be like in a scout camp where the only thing you can produce is use GIMP to make little lanyards or something like that.
Right.
I mean, industrialism is critical and important, but it developed in the West and it's being washed away today. It's certainly a value, however, that, certainly the Chinese and the Japanese have adopted as part of their culture. But I'm not sure if a lot of these other cultures, like the Indians, like the American Indians and the Africans, I don't think they've successfully adopted the idea of entrepreneurialism. I mean, maybe it's because they have so many unemployed types, unskilled types. They figure, well, if we have a machine do something that 10 men could do, that's 10 men that are unemployed. We can't take their jobs away from them.
Exactly.
So, and greenism shouldn't be. I mean, everybody likes birds and bunnies and clean air and clean water, including myself. But you gotta have priorities. So industrialism's kind of being washed away by the new generation, I think. And number 11 is free markets. I mean, free markets are a natural thing all over the world where, you go to the market and just sell the potatoes you grew and so forth. But the idea of totally unrestrained free markets, they're viewed as dangerous, and they're being replaced by highly regulated, everything's written down, how and how much and what do you pay, and basically being replaced by socialism, where instead of free markets, where you make stuff and sell stuff, where the state or the collective makes stuff, so you can't exploit other people. So I think free markets are being washed away too. And that is, and idealizing free markets, I think that is a uniquely Western value. And 12 is the concept of progress itself. Because before, Western civilization really coalesced, it's that, things are the way they are. I mean, Yahweh created a certain order, and that's the way things are. And you don't change things or advance things or do a lot more or anything. In fact, it's better if everybody dresses the same, because there won't be inequality. You can't, if you have the concept of progress, you can't have equality, because some people are lazy and some people are energetic, some people are smart, stupid, weak, strong. So the concept of progress runs totally counter to equality. And so take your choice, equality or progress.
It's interesting that the idea that progress is something from Western civilization. I never thought about it like that before, because you think of this long march of humanity forward, from subsistence survival, essentially, through the industrial age and all that. But you think that that's a Western thing, the idea that progress is something that should be valued and should be prioritized, that whole idea is a Western idea.
I think it is. I mean, we can discuss that with somebody that says, no, it's not. But I mean, I guess people just naturally want progress, or most people do, at least if they're thinking as individuals. But in the West, progress it's the only place it's enshrined as something that should happen.
Right.
You want to happen. I mean, it happens in other places, no question about that, but it's not like a fundamental value.
That's a good point. It's one of the big things that you notice as an American, if you spend a lot of time in not every country in the world, but a lot of the other countries in the world, is that there's a more of a, use Argentina as an example, much more fatalistic. It's not, it's almost like, well, why bother? You can't really change anything anyway. And as you realize that people, because they have this belief, maybe that it can't be advanced, they don't even try to make things advance. Whereas it seems like even the dumbest American the most foolish American that I grew up with had this belief that things can and would be better in the future, that somehow, some way, things were going to get better for everybody.
Yeah, that he actually can improve himself and things would get general. I mean, next year's model Chevy would be better than this year's model Chevy.
Right.
But a lot of people say, hey, this annual model thing, that's wasteful. And, they're exploiting us with promoting us on getting,
Right.
progress can be gradual. I mean, you don't advance automatically from a Model T to a Ford GT. So of course there's a new model every year on the way from so, and today, somehow, race has gotten tied into this thing. And I got to say something else that's highly politically incorrect, where Black people are being taught, this is idiotic. Instead of treating other people as individuals, they treat them as members of a race, number one. And, it's now actually become improper to say what Martin Luther King said. You should judge people by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. That is out too. It shows that you're probably a white racist.
Exactly. Yes. It's crazy.
Things like being on time and self-improvement and, having Boy Scout virtues and that. And I've said for years, this is absolutely insane. Yes, when the Europeans conquered other parts of the world, and I think that's improper to go in and militarily change things. They could have, simple trade would have made things better. But the Africans have absolutely nothing to complain about, because when Da Gama was rounding the Cape of Good Hope in, what was that, 1485 or whatever, whenever he did that, if he just thrown a wheel out, I mean, Africa should be internally indebted to Europe. But that's not really true, because he would have had to have thrown out an instruction book on how to use it. But that's not even true, because nobody knew how to read the instruction book to start with. So, I mean, Africa is so lucky that Europe branched out and gave them these things. And yeah, nasty things happened along the way. But hey, listen, we're people, and nasty things just naturally happen because of psychological aberrations or God knows what, or usually the state having something to do with something. But these concepts of Western civilization, if they're being washed away in the West, they're going to be washed away, because if these are the causes of civilization as we know it, if they're washed away, what's going to happen is the fruits of civilization are going to be washed away with it. You're not going to have Western music or Western literature or Western art or a lot of other things that only developed in the West because of these values. And these values disappear. It could be, I think, that the fruits of civilization wash away too. And if the West destroys itself and you can't accumulate capital and invest it intelligently to grow more capital, I wouldn't doubt that you're going to see the primitive parts of the world, which is basically the whole world except for China and Japan outside of the West. I mean, they could go back. They could go back to the Dark Ages. Progress is not a guarantee in the world. I mean, it's just not. You're not guaranteed progress or anything. You're not guaranteed something to eat tomorrow, even. So.
That's a frightening idea. And I think that, one of the things that seems that naturally springs out of a lot of these things you're talking about is just basic innovation. Like when you think about industrialism, entrepreneurship, individualism, definitely free markets. Like the problem if markets are overly regulated and outcomes are sort of prescribed in advance, then there's no room for innovation. Like there's no opportunity, for things to advance at all. So without that, it's
because not only that, it's not that the best and the brightest people rise to the top of the state. It's the worst kind of people. They're the kind of people that want to. There's two kinds of people. Well, there's lots of kinds, but for this purpose, there's people that want to control physical reality, and there's people that want to control other people. And guess what kind want to be anything from your city councilman to your county commissioner to your president of the United States. It's people that want to control other people. They're the worst kind of people. And yet they're worshiped and idealized by, by the hoi polloi. It does tend to give one a gloomy outlook for the future, although I'm very optimistic about the future, at least if we get through this next 10 years somehow.
The next 10 years is tough. So I want to recap these really quick. And if anyone who's watching has any comments or anything they'd like to add to these 12, certainly leave it in the comments. But they were free speech, number one, free thought, rationality, privacy, private property, liberty, limited government, individualism, entrepreneurship, industrialism, free markets, and progress itself.
And I'm sure we're missing some there. So I hope somebody adds a few more in the comment box and with an explanation.
Yeah, I hope so too. Okay, good. Well, we'll leave it at that. And I know that one of the topics we were talking about right before this that I'd like to get to at some point this week is talking about some of the Global Economic Forum's reset, some of their ideas. So
yeah, that's really disturbing. I mean, all these people with white hairless cats stroking them, figuring out what to do with us.
I think they have plans. And so we're going to talk about those plans tomorrow, hopefully.
Okay, great, Matt.
Thanks, Doug. Appreciate it.